Hi, welcome back to City Vision University's Vocation, Calling, and Purpose of Work course. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about how worldview shapes our understanding of vocation and calling and work. Just to frame where we are, in the first part of this course, we talked about who you are, and then we went into a little bit of what you do. This week and next week, we're going to be talking about what you believe. So that's the theology or worldview of work. And as we explained, there's layers of, exploring calling. So you might start off with, I want a good job. And then you realize, okay, I need a plan. So what are the causes? And, that's what we're going to get to, in the end of the course. But this part is what's underneath the causes, recognizing that I need values that bring success. I need a transformation of my worldview. Everyone's worldview gets distorted. That's a part of, the fact, just saying that we're all sinners. Like all of our worldviews have flaws in them. We need acculturation, we need emotional and relational health, and then we need to be in a community. Worldview isn't just a cognitive thing that you need to start on your own. You need a whole community around that. And again, to explain, our courses at City Vision, worldview really gets adjusted through spiritual formation. And this course is a worldview heavy course and a spiritual formation heavy course. These other things that we talk about, cross-cultural competencies, acculturation and things along those lines, those can also help. So what is worldview? So Tim Keller, in our book that we're reading, Every Good Endeavor, says it's an understanding and story of the world that answers three things. How are things supposed to be? What's the main problem with things as they are? And what's the solution and how it can be realized? And the worldview you believe, one of the ideas behind worldview is the worldview you believe is reflected by your actions rather than what you say you believe. Now, we're going to talk about a lot of dimensions of worldview. One of the dimensions I want to talk about is what are the overall pictures or what are the overall metaphors that are shaping our life, that are shaping our worldview, and how is that, shaping how we approach career. So this is just an example of a potential, metaphor or image of career. So I think early in my career, I thought that there's only one option. If I mess up and I choose the wrong option in my career, then I'm going to fall off this high wire act, and I have completely messed up my life. That is a broken worldview. That's a broken metaphor. That's a broken, example. Now, I think a much more healthy option is, that of GPS. So going off track can only create detours. And, if you've had a GPS thing and you go the wrong way and it just says rerouting, right? So, we have students that have taken detours that, may have been a decade or 2 decades. And sometimes the detours go through addiction and jail. And that's fine. God's going to get you back on track. The point isn't, where are you currently, or did you take a detour? It's, are you paying attention to your GPS? Now, if you keep ignoring your GPS, if you're not connected with God, then there's a bigger problem, right? So ultimately, I think that's the framing that you need to have is the GPS. Now, another thing I want to talk about with worldview related to career is how our careers influence our worldview. So early on, I did my undergraduate degree in engineering and did a lot of courses in engineering and science. Now, Isaac Newton, his main worldview is he thought of God as a watchmaker. So he said, like a watchmaker, God was forced to intervene in the universe and tinker with the mechanism from time to time to ensure that it operated in good working order. Now, I would say whenever I was an undergraduate, that was one of my main ways of imagining God, that he was like a watchmaker and he would, intervene if the watch got broken. But the problem with that is if I'm in just some big clock, that's not actually biblical. The Bible doesn't explain, say that God, just created a big clock and he doesn't really care about us. And every now and then he might fix the clock. But, if the clock, messes you up, he doesn't really care. That's that's a broken worldview, but that's a worldview that got shaped by my career. Now, often our careers significantly will distort our worldviews. And the way I describe this is the Christmas tree idea of a worldview. So you have there's always this battle on Christmas, and I think that the point isn't, do we have a Christmas tree at our house, even though, Christmas trees originated as a pagan tradition. And that's not, the key point. The key point is, what is the center of Christmas, for us. And for many people, the center of Christmas is getting stuff. And, it's a secular worldview, and they might have a Christian concept, and they're like, oh yeah, and by the way, it's about Jesus. And ultimately, in education, what you need to do is you need to have everything go through a Christian worldview. So all the different things you learn, humanities, sciences, social sciences, and cultural studies, go through a Christian worldview. So let me just use an example of that in, say, the counseling field. So a Christian worldview versus a secular counseling worldview. So the base worldview is Christian worldview. And then there's something you'd call the secular scientific naturalism. Basically, it's like what you can prove in science is all that matters. And secular would be basically saying there isn't a God. So what is the fundamental problem? The fundamental problem is sin, is Christian worldview. Secular counseling would say it's a psychological problem. What's the fundamental solution? It's salvation. And secular counseling would say it's counseling. Who are we? We're in God's image, but flawed. Secular counseling would say we're just thinking animals. We're a collection of atoms in the worldview. Where do we come from? God. And secular counseling worldview would be accidental, cosmic chance. Philosophy, spiritual, holistic. Secular would be materialistic. We're just the material we're made of. Reductionistic. We're just a bunch of atoms that randomly came together. Values, Bible's based. Secular counseling pretends falsely to be values free. There's no such thing. That's like saying you don't have a location in the universe. Everyone has a location. How should I live? Love God and love others. And secular counseling generally is, individual pleasure maximizing, even the term self-actualizing, it's centered around the self, right? So why is this important? You're going to work in a field, and you're going to be educated, into that's going to involve both Christian and secular frameworks, even if it's in, ministry or nonprofit management or business. And what happens is you're going to be surrounded by things. And the picture that I get of a lot of Christians is it's this guy who was born with, one really strong arm and one weak arm, and he decided to just go with that. And he was only going to, strengthen one arm. And this isn't Photoshop. This is the real picture of the guy. And what happens with many people is we get trained in a secular worldview, and all our training is in this, his right hand. And then our training in our Christian worldview is very weak. And because of that, the secular worldview is dominant. So that's just something to recognize in whatever field you're in, especially counseling as you go up through it, or even in the business world. There's going to be worldview assumptions that happen with that. Now, another thing I want to talk about is, and this is common, with our students. So I myself have PTSD. So often early in my ministry, one of my analogies that I used often in my ministry was, it's a battlefield. We're doing urban ministry. We're on the battlefield. Now, there are aspects of that whenever you go to your house, which we did at the time, and there's bullet holes in the house and there's a police line going around it because there's a shootout in front of your house. That may feel like there's some truth to that, but the reality is that's not going to be a helpful biblical worldview to have all the time. If what that conveys to you is that the world is fundamentally unsafe, because the Bible says that God has us in his hands, he cares about us, and he is protecting us. So, instead of this picture, a better picture might be, this one that, and this is more of an emotional, thing. So one of the things that we're going to ask you to do in your assignment in a following week is to say, what are the ways that your worldview gets distorted? So if you're like me and you have a trauma background, you might tend to go towards, thinking that the world's a battlefield rather than feeling like God has us in his hands and, we're his child and he's keeping us safe. So that's more of an emotional aspect of how your worldview might get distorted. But there's also cognitive. Usually whenever people talk about worldview, they talk about it in a cognitive sense. And, I'll just stop in this slide. And if you want, you can actually go through and, follow this exercise. But what this is a decision tree. And then what is your worldview, right? And you can pause, on this tree if you want to look at it. But, you start with the first question: does God exist? And then you have different answers: yes, no, don't care, don't know. So don't know would be agnostic, right? And then, if God exists, is there more than one God? And then if you say yes, you're polytheist, right? And then if you say that God exists, is God in control of the world now? So Benjamin Franklin's what's considered a deist. So he basically said God started the clock and then he left it alone. And that's what a deist is. And then, there's other things that you can do, going through this, and you can kind of follow this decision tree. But all of this is thinking more of a cognitive framing of worldview. May or may not be helpful for you, but I think the bigger thing that I'm concerned with our students is I want you to think through what are the ways that your worldview gets distorted. So you may not, externally say I'm a nihilist, but you may have felt like the last 20 years of your life, a lot of people who have gone and become, who's gone through addiction, it does feel like life becomes meaningless. So, at a heart level, you might tend towards nihilism, even though at a head level, you know that, you're following God. So, is there meaning in the world? And where do you find that meaning, and things along those lines. So hopefully this is helpful. And the end goal, what we want you to do is we want you to reflect more on your core beliefs and reflect more on how they inform your view towards work. And then the goal in week 6 is that you're going to be developing your own kind of spiritual formation plan and plan to help heal and repair your own worldview. So thanks a lot.